Would you recommend Qigong for bone health, perhaps more than yoga or Pilates? Okay, so that's a very specific question that was sent in by someone who watches the channel, and that's going to be the topic of this episode of Chi Life. So I'm pretty sure I've made a vlog, not quite this exact same topic, but generally about how Qigong is beneficial for bone health previously. So I'll have a look for that and see if I can find it and put a link in the description below, because there'll probably be some things that I cover in there that I'm not necessarily going to cover in this one. But equally, because this question is so specific, there will be a few things that are relevant, that are different in this one too. So specifically, I'm not just going to talk about how Qigong is good for bone health, but also how that compares to yoga and Pilates, a little bit of comparative analysis. Now, I'm not an expert on Pilates, I'm not an expert on yoga. I have had a reasonable amount of exposure to both, a lot more exposure to yoga than Pilates, but enough that I have, I think at least enough of a basic understanding to know a lot of how these might apply to bone health as compared to Qigong. So that's the basis I'm coming from. Anyone who is an expert in yoga and Pilates, and there's things that I don't cover or I miss, or anything like that, I apologize. And maybe you might like to comment about it below and say, hey, what about this? There might be some details that I'm not fully conversant with. So I guess to begin with, what makes our bones healthy? Okay, there's a whole lot of things that make our bones healthy. Nutrition is a really important one. That's probably, well, it's not necessarily beyond the scope of Qigong, because there are Qigong practices that will certainly help with our digestion and things like that, and affects our digestion and how we absorb nutrients. But I don't think we're going to get into that sort of nitty-gritty detail. We're going to focus more on the specifics of how the mechanics of essentially how our bones stay healthy. So a big thing in terms of having healthy bones is obviously the level of minerals within our bones, how dense they are and therefore how strong they are. Not just the level of minerals though, but also how well the bones flex. So this then relates to the matrix that those minerals are held within, which then allows blood to flow through them and to keep the bone marrow healthy as well, and makes the bones less fragile. So we're looking at mineralization and keeping the bones flexible so blood and other nutrients can flow through them. How does this apply sort of physically to practices? Well, it's kind of really just one thing, but in a sense, maybe a couple of things that particularly apply to this. So the way that our bones actually put minerals into the bone structure is through electrical charges. So minerals flow around in our bloodstream and so on, and minerals, calcium, magnesium, that sort of thing. When they're by themselves as individual atoms, they have a charge. And then in order to take them into the bone matrix, the bone needs to have an opposite charge to take them in, to draw them out of the blood, and then, set them into the bone matrix. Now, the way this happens, I guess there's different parts to how this happens, but a big part of what creates this electrical charge through the bone to keep it healthy, again, maybe two parts, because we do naturally have electrical currents moving through our bodies that to some extent is going to do this. But the thing that is going to really strengthen this to create strong, healthy bones is by the bones being flexed and compressed. And when they're flexed and when they're compressed, the crystalline structures actually create a little electrical current through them. It's called a piezoelectric effect. And this electrical current, it's the same piezoelectric effect if you've ever had like a gas stove where you kind of turn the knob and it clicks. It's not one of the electric ones where you just hold it and it clicks, but you turn it and like there's a force and it clicks something and it makes a little spark. That's a piezoelectric starter, and it's like creating a spark from this compression of crystals. Same sort of thing within our bones, that flexing them, compressing them, creates the electrical current, draws the minerals in. So that flexing and compressing, particularly the flexing, covers both of the things in terms of keeping the bones healthy. One, having the minerals, and two, the flexing of them keeps them flexible so they don't become too rigid, too brittle. So that then, keeps them resilient, and that's going to keep them healthy, allow the blood to flow through, and so on. So how do different practices, or how well are different practices going to do this? To some extent, any kind of exercise is going to give some stimulus to the bones, right? To some extent, even just moving my arms around like this, there are some varying forces going through the bones, and that's going to stimulate them to a small degree. But the main types of practices or exercises that are going to really stimulate these bones in a way that's going to create electrical activity, draw those minerals in, keep them flexible, is exercises where we're bearing load. So we're putting weight through those bones because that's going to compress them, or actually exercises where we actually specifically flex the bones, and that's really quite specific. But so that's what we're going to be looking for, and like, does it compress, does it flex the bones? Now, Pilates is somewhat load bearing, and sometimes people are in different positions holding themselves with their body, but it's very much based on muscular activation. I wouldn't say it does a huge amount in terms of really loading, compressing, and bending those bones. It's very much focused on muscle activation. So will there be some benefit? Absolutely. And just the benefit of generally having your muscle stronger, having better posture, and all the good things that come with that. Yeah, there's going to be some benefit from Pilates. I wouldn't say it really specifically targets the bones though. Yoga. How's yoga going to do for that? Well, within many yoga postures, yoga asanas, there's certainly there's going to be more loading of the bones in some of those, where you're in different postures, particularly ones on the ground, you're moving into different positions and so on. And so naturally, within the postures, there's going to be more compressive force, more loading through the bones for some of those. And transitioning from one posture to another, you're going to get some flexion of the bones in some of those transitions as well. So yeah, on that basis, I'd say yoga is more likely to have some direct benefits to the bones than Pilates. So cool, a little bit more direct. I wouldn't still say super specific though. But yeah, a bit more potential benefit. Moving on, Qigong. How's Qigong going to do in terms of strengthening those bones? The answer is, of course, with so many things, to a large extent, it depends. It depends on what specific practices we're talking about within Qigong. So I'll start with some of the most basic sorts of practices, or most common, not necessarily basic, but common. So a lot of the most common types of Qigong practice involve slow and quite gentle movements without a lot of force. Like, the whole focus of them is often to be moving very gently. And so within those sorts of practices, you'd think like, okay, the movements are so gentle. Yeah, I mean, if you're standing, a lot of Qigong practices are done standing. Yep, you're going to be loading the bones to some extent. You might even be standing in a somewhat deeper posture that's going to load them some more. So yeah, there's some physical compression going on there. And then as you're moving, yeah, there's some very gentle sort of stimulation, varying forces in the bones. It's going to stimulate them very gently. You might think, okay, it's a bit gentle. There's some stimulus of the bones, but not really a lot directly from the physical movement. But this is where Qigong has maybe an added advantage compared to some other types of practices. And that is that within Qigong, we often have a very direct focus on the energy and on the energy flow. Now, you might have that to some degree in Pilates, to some degree, probably not a huge degree. In yoga, you may have that depending on the type of yoga. Often in yoga, you're thinking about that in a very different way though, and it's not really your primary focus. Within Qigong, that flow of energy is often like a really key primary focus in what you're doing. And when we focus on that energy, we tend to naturally strengthen its flow. So common principle referred to not just in Qigong, but in lots of different things. Where attention goes, the energy flows. The energy goes to where our attention goes. And so if our attention is on the flow of energy, we're naturally going to strengthen it. And generally, this is going to mean strengthening multiple aspects of it. So it is going to mean strengthening things like blood flow. It's going to mean strengthening things like, nerve activity. It's also going to mean moving often more heat through the body, and also things like more electrical current. Some of the common sensations that we have when we're working with energy in Qigong, I mean, yeah, heat, vibration, these sorts of things. But a really common one is magnetic type sensations. And these magnetic type sensations are often connected to, well, electrical activity within the body, because whenever there's an electrical current, it makes a magnetic field. And so when we're tuning into those sensations of energy flow, we're naturally reinforcing, natural functions of our body that are already there, but we're strengthening them to create, to some degree often, more electrical current and flow as well. And so even though the movements of Qigong in a lot of common practices are very gentle, there's a stronger effect than we might expect just simply from just the physical exertion that's going on, because of that added energy flow that we activate within those movements, within those practices. Another benefit of this is that if someone is, their bones are already not so healthy, and this is why they're now interested in maintaining their bone health or increasing their bone health. Some of the more strenuous types of practice, going into different postures and things like that in yoga, might be starting to get a bit challenging for them, and maybe a bit not so wise for some of the more challenging ones that would flex their bones more. And so in that case, having a really gentle alternative like Qigong practices and movements where they can do them really gently and still increase that energy flow, which will bring more minerals into the bones, really good option in terms of just safety. So that's covering some of the most common types of Qigong practices, really gentle movements where we focus on the energy flow. One of the other things where Qigong has an advantage for, particularly something like this, for bone health, is that Qigong practices are so diverse. The core thing with Qigong is, well, Qi, energy, Gong, work or skill. Developing energy with skill, developing skill with energy, working with our energy. And there's just so many ways that we can do that. There's so many different techniques, methodologies, and so on. And so Qigong includes like so many different techniques, practices that we can do this. And some of these very directly focus on things that can strengthen those bones. Now, not all of them are going to be suitable for everyone. So again, some of these can get a bit strenuous, and they might not be so suitable for some of the, again, those people who maybe their bones are already a little bit weak, and they're wanting to strengthen them up, or at least they're not going to be suitable in their more vigorous version. Now, often for a vigorous practice, you can do it in a gentle way. You can apply the same principle, but sort of scale it down so it would be suitable. So what do some of these practices look like? Well, one that is still very intention focused. So similar to what we were talking about with the slow, gentle movements and how we're focusing on the energy, so that strengthens the effect anyway. There are some much more subtle, so much less movement going on practices, but where we're very specifically focused on the flow of energy through the bones. And so this type of practice is most commonly called bone breathing. And there are, that's probably the best way to describe it for now. And where we're specifically using our intention and our focus on our breath to move the energy through the bones. And of course, a lot of the energy that flows through the bones is going to be electrical. And it's really interesting as people get into this type of practice and they experience this kind of flow of energy through the bones. To begin with, often it takes a little bit to tune into and to start to connect your mind, connect your intention to, and that it can take a bit of time and practice. But once people start to get it, it's like, oh wow, there's really some interesting sensations of energy moving through the bones as we do that. And this is going to help keep those bones healthy and bring those minerals in and keep the blood flowing and all that sort of thing. So very, very direct type of practice, and subtle, gentle. It's going to be suitable for anyone of any condition of health. Then some of the ones that are more vigorous. Well, another one that's very simple. So one of the best ways to create compression through the bones is through, not through static exercise or anything like that, but it's where essentially where we jolt the bones to some degree. So where we move and then we jolt and we allow our weight to move through it, and that creates a short, sharp compression. And so a really simple Qigong practice that does this, really famous one used quite widely, it's probably got lots of names, most common name, heel drops, where we come up onto the balls of our feet and then we drop down onto our heels, and it sends like a little shock all the way up through all of our bones, and it stimulates them, creates a piezoelectric effect, and that's going to help bring more minerals in. You know, similar, I guess, more normal activities that you might do that would have this sort of effect are just jumping up and down or skipping, or, you know, things like this, which is going to, you've got that sort of like somewhat jolting through the bone, which is going to, yeah, create electrical activity. So that's a nice simple one. Yeah, and then a couple of the ones that tend to be even more vigorous. There are specific practices where we use dynamic tension of the body. So this is using our own muscles, our own connective tissue, and we're flexing them against each other. And part of this is it is activating those muscles and connective tissue, of course, and that's strengthening them. But part of this as well is to actually flex the bones, make them bend. And not stay bent, of course, but flex and release and flex and release. And what this does, of course, is it keeps the bone healthy. It stops too much of, essentially too much fat being stored inside in the bone, so that the bone marrow inside stays healthier. And it also, again, it's going to help to draw, it's going to help make that crystalline matrix strong and resilient, so it doesn't become too brittle. Also, in flexing those bones, part of the aim, keeping the bone marrow healthy, is also to actually stimulate the release of stem cells from the bone marrow into the body, so that will help to rejuvenate the body as well. So that one is used, it's used quite extensively in different martial arts, sort of martial application of Qigong, because it is, you know, a very strong, dynamic type of practice, and it does develop incredible physical strength and resilience. Probably the most specific application of that is within iron shirt practices, which, of course, even if you're not doing Kung Fu, if you're not doing a martial art, the iron shirt practices you can do by themselves, just simply for your own health, your own well-being, because they really do build up your overall vitality and resilience. So it might not be that you're wanting to, you know, be doing a martial art specifically and learn how to fight or anything like that, but yeah, it's a good thing to have that vitality and resilience. And this is a good example of a practice actually that you can scale. So you can do it in a way that it's the most challenging exercise you've ever done in your life. You know, if you're a really fit person, you can really work hard into it because you're working against your own resistance. But at the same time, you can scale it back and do it more gently, because you scale it according to how much of your own resistance you use, and do it at a level that's going to be suitable for someone who's maybe quite weak, quite sick, quite broken down, as a way to gradually build themselves back up again. Another type of practice that again is into the more vigorous side of things, or often used in a vigorous way, can be scaled, is types of practices where we strike ourselves. Yeah, and of course, to a certain degree, the harder we strike, well, certainly the stronger the stimulus of the bones, because we will strike over all the tissues, the muscles, the connective tissue, but the bones as well underneath those. They take some of that impact. That impact, again, it's compressing those crystals, and it's going to cause the bone to bring more minerals in to make it stronger. Different variations of this. Sometimes it's done just using your hand, and obviously that's one that you can control really easily, and so you can do it very gently. If you do it too gently, it's debatable how much stimulation it's really going to give to the bones. It's probably most of the stimulation is going to go to the soft tissues if you're doing it really gently. Really, to stimulate the bones with the striking, it's probably as you start to get a bit harder. And certainly as you start to use different implements rather than the hands themselves, if you start to use things, there are tappers. So sometimes they're called a brush or a broom, because they are like, you know, pieces of cane, which, you know, historically people would like bundle these up into a bundle and then use those to, you know, sweep with all of the bristles coming out. But you make a nice orderly bundle of these and hit yourself with it. Again, using that, a lot of the stimulation is going to be more at the level of the muscles and the connective tissue and so on, but some of that's going to go a little bit deeper into the bones. And as you progress and make this a more advanced practice, you move from using, you know, a bundle of thin pieces of cane to using thicker pieces of cane or even thicker pieces of other types of wood and striking yourself with those. And that then definitely starts to stimulate the bones more. And then at higher levels, which you really do need to build up to. Don't just go jumping and go like, yeah, I'm wanting to have stronger results sooner. Not a good idea. You can harm yourself quite easily. You'll use brushes again, or brooms, made out of thin pieces of metal. So, and use those to strike, and that will penetrate a lot deeper, a lot stronger stimulus to the bone. And then eventually even pieces of metal, like thicker pieces, and using that to strike and stimulate. And all of these are considered, they are types of Qigong. And again, you need to build up into them gradually. So which would I recommend, or would I recommend Qigong over yoga or Pilates for bone health? I think it's important for people to do the sorts of practices, the sorts of exercise that they feel good about doing. So, but within that, I'd say within Qigong, there are certainly a whole range of different ways that the practices can either already be or can be targeted specifically towards increasing and maintaining bone health. So from that point of view, you can target much more specifically with Qigong, I think. Anyway, as I mentioned, I'm certainly not a world expert on yoga or Pilates. I have some exposure. I think enough to make a comparison of this sort. Hopefully it's been interesting, maybe useful. If you are interested in, so actually several of those practices actually I talked about in Qigong, the bone breathing and some of the ones where we flex the bones using dynamic tension and also striking the body. We do all of these and go quite deep into them and how they work in the Inner Fire Qigong program. So if you're interested in that, I'll put a link to or I think there's already a link to where you can find some of our courses in the description below. The Inner Fire Qigong program, it is a really in-depth program. We go into a whole range of different types of practice within that, not just these ones I've talked about, but they're in there amongst some other ones too. We don't tend to run the Inner Fire Qigong program all that often. We do have one coming up, I think, end of February 2024. So yeah, that could be an opportunity if you really want to get into these. On the other hand, if you're watching this video after February 2024, we're bound to run it again at some point in the future. I just don't know when that'll be. So yeah, check the links below and you'll be able to find information about it. All right, cool. I hope that's been interesting. I look forward to talking to you on another one soon.